Cincinnati, Queen of the West. On the banks of the Ohio River, Cincinnati was a gateway to the fertile farmlands of the newly settled Midwest. To this thriving community of merchants and farmers came a young New Englander in 1838, fresh out of Yale Law School. Alphonso Taft became a leader in this growing new world, and he immersed himself in politics, founding Ohio's Republican Party. In 1857, his second wife, Louise Torrey, gave birth to William Howard Taft. This plump, good-natured baby would achieve two of the highest offices in the land, President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The house on Auburn Avenue was a happy place filled with the laughter of children. There were 5 boys and a girl. Will Taft was a bright and industrious student, and like his father, attended Yale University. Graduating second in his class in 1878, he returned to Cincinnati to study law. Taft was admitted to the Ohio bar in 1880 and was appointed assistant prosecutor for Hamilton County. At 25, Will Taft was appointed a United States Internal Revenue Collector, the youngest in the nation. He controlled 115 jobs, but unlike the common practice of the times, resisted pressure to use his position for political gain. He left after a year and went into private practice. But within 2 years, he was back in public service as assistant county solicitor. During these early years, young Taft developed an acute distaste for the rampant political corruption of the Gilded Age. He gained a reputation for integrity and ethics that would stay with him for life. After an ardent courtship, Will Taft married Helen Herron in 1886. A strong-willed, politically active woman, Nellie was to have a great influence on Taft's career. At just 29, Taft was appointed to fill a vacancy on the Superior Court of Ohio. The next year, the public overwhelmingly elected him to a full term. Without question, Taft's career was initially helped by his father's reputation and by his own Republican connections. But with each job, Taft's reputation for talent, hard work, and integrity grew. A year and a half into his second term as Superior Court judge, young Taft's rising star took yet another upward turn. President Benjamin Harrison appointed Taft Solicitor General of the United States, and he and Nellie moved to Washington. As Solicitor General, Taft represented the U.S. government before the Supreme Court. He distinguished himself by meticulous preparation and a clear grasp of the issue at hand. While in Washington, Taft formed a friendship with Teddy Roosevelt, then chairman of the Civil Service Commission. Taft's placid and thoughtful personality meshed well with the energetic and incisive Roosevelt. Their long friendship would change the course of the nation. President Harrison appointed Taft to sit on the 6th Judicial Circuit Court in Cincinnati, the second highest court in the land. Taft resigned as Solicitor General and with his family moved back to Cincinnati. Then 35 years old, he would be ruling on crucial questions that had considerable impact on the turbulent social issues of the day. During the 1890s, the American labor movement was becoming a political and social force pressing hard for change, fair wages, better working conditions. It was a time when the widening gap between rich and poor was a source of major conflict, a time of strikes, of boycotts, of violence. Many of these issues ended up in court. Taft affirmed labor's right to organize and to strike, and maintained that workers were entitled to a safe workplace, But he would not overlook illegal actions, no matter how socially justified, and his rulings irritated some labor leaders. Toward the end of the century, the United States was becoming a prominent player on the world stage, involving itself in the affairs of distant nations. President McKinley asked Taft to head a commission to the Philippines to set up a civilian government. Reluctantly, he accepted and resigned his judgeship. Taft and his family arrived in Manila Bay in the spring of 1900 to serve as Governor General of the Philippines. Taft enjoyed the immense challenge and turned out to be an exceptional administrator. During his tenure, roads, harbors, schools, hospitals, and railroads were built, and local governments were established. Taft treated the Filipino people with respect and fairness, and they in turn grew to love this gentle giant. In September 1901, President McKinley was assassinated, and Taft's old friend Theodore Roosevelt became president. Twice while Taft was in the Philippines, President Roosevelt offered him a seat on the Supreme Court, a position that Taft had always dreamed about, but he declined, feeling his work in the Philippines was unfinished. Finally, after his third year in the Philippines, Taft accepted the position of Secretary of War in Roosevelt's cabinet and returned to Washington. It was a job his father had once held. As Secretary of War, Taft was put in charge of the construction of the Panama Canal, which was hopelessly bogged down in disputes and gross inefficiencies. He got the project on track again, successfully organizing this massive undertaking. Taft became Roosevelt's trusted troubleshooter and spokesman. He traveled extensively throughout the U.S. and around the world, speaking out for American interests and Roosevelt's policies. When Theodore Roosevelt had been elected as president in 1904, he had made it very clear that under no circumstances would he serve a third term. For the 1908 presidential election, Roosevelt's choice as successor was his old friend and advisor, William Howard Taft. Taft easily won the Republican nomination. His opponent, William Jennings Bryan, attacked the Republicans and Taft as opposed to the working man and ordinary people. Taft campaigned hard, defending his record, and won the election by a 2-to-1 majority in the Electoral College. Once in office, Taft had been expected to closely follow Roosevelt's policies, but he turned out to be his own man. His actions often alienated many of Roosevelt's loyalists, as well as the progressive wing of the Republican Party. Embroiled in controversial issues such as tariffs and taxes, and personality clashes with powerful congressional leaders, the Tafts still enjoyed their life in the White House. Will Taft was an avid golfer and was the first president to toss out the baseball to open the Major League season. Nellie planted the first cherry trees around the tidal basin in Washington. The couple celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary at the White House with a grand garden party. During his presidency, Taft pushed for many reforms in government, including the federal income tax, the creation of a comprehensive federal budget, and increased enforcement of the antitrust law. On the world stage, Taft saw the need for America to abandon its isolation. Through diplomacy and sometimes a show of force, he vigorously protected America's interests abroad. However, Taft's conservatism bothered his former mentor, Theodore Roosevelt. Over time, their relationship became more strained. By the end of Taft's term in office, the split in the Republican Party was irreparable. Because of his dissatisfaction with Taft and his policies, Roosevelt decided to run against Taft for the Republican Party nomination for president. Taft defeated his former friend and supporter and was again nominated as the Republican candidate. Roosevelt then formed his own progressive or Bull Moose party and ran against both Taft and Wilson as a third-party candidate. Because Taft and Roosevelt split the Republican vote, Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic candidate, won the 1912 presidential election. Confiding to friends that it was a relief to be back in private life, Taft accepted a professorship of law at Yale and settled down to teach and write. He also spent more time with his family at their beloved Murray Bay in Quebec. He was in demand as a speaker and spoke often about government issues. His writings about the presidency have come down to us as important statements on the powers of the office. When the United States entered the First World War, Taft was again called to government service. He co-chaired the National War Labor Board, settling strikes in war industries. As president of the League to Enforce Peace, he worked to promote mediation as a way to settle international disputes. Later, he became a strong supporter of the League of Nations, the forerunner of the United Nations. With the 1920 landslide election of Warren Harding, the Republicans were back in the White House, and Taft's lifelong dreams of serving on the Supreme Court came closer to reality. It had been more than 30 years since President Harrison had first considered Taft for a seat on the court. In the intervening years, he had never lost sight of his goal. "Presidents come and go," he once said, "but the court goes on forever." In the spring of 1921, Chief Justice Edward White died, and Taft was asked to fill that vacancy, finally attaining his lifelong goal. The court that Taft took over was hopelessly swamped, with the backlog continuing to increase. Chief Justice Taft worked tirelessly and finally succeeded in having Congress restructure and streamline the federal judiciary system. One of the most significant reforms gave the court the power to select the cases it would hear, so the court could focus on constitutional questions and issues of national importance. Taft usually worked 12 hours a day that began with a 4-mile walk from his home to the court. It was Taft's desire that the court's rulings be close to unanimous. Feeling that split decisions diminished the public's respect for the court and its rulings, he used his considerable charm, wit, and energy to influence the other justices. But to his dismay, the court was deeply divided on worker and employer rights, state and federal questions, and issues of property and privacy. The final chapter in Taft's illustrious career came to a close when, because of failing health, he resigned as Chief Justice on February 3, 1930. Less than a month later, he died. For 50 years, Taft devoted his life to the public good. During those years, America changed from a nation of farmers and merchants to an industrial giant and a world leader. As much as any single man, Taft helped steady the course of the nation through these turbulent years. He accomplished this while maintaining the highest standard of integrity and honesty throughout his life. It is for these qualities that he is widely recognized and respected by the American people. Observe the New York Times. Of some public men, it is said that they are the most admired of their generation. Of others, that they are the most disliked or distrusted. But about Mr. Taft, there is a universal agreement that he made himself the most loved.